Welcome to Tales from the Trenches Tuesdays. Today, it is my absolute pleasure to have Jim Langley on. Jim is the president of Langley Innovations, and he's pioneered a number of practices that have been emulated by hundreds of institutions of higher learning. The knowledge he acquired from conceiving and conducting 3 path-breaking campaigns at 3 major institutions, and the insight he gleaned from decades of research on donor behavior has been shared in 5 books, dozens of articles, hundreds of blog posts, and scores of seminars, workshops, and speeches. As Vice President for Advancement at Georgetown University, Jim imagined and led a massive discovery initiative conducting face-to-face interviews of alumni around the world. The purpose of the interviews was to discover what Jim calls the animating passions of the alumni, then link those passions with the university's programmatic initiatives to establish Georgetown as the place that alumni not only give to, but through, to realize their larger societal ideals. Renowned for his public speaking, Jim's professional seminars are consistently described as the best I've ever attended by his peers, and he's been awarded the Crystal Apple by the Council for the Advancement and Support of Education for having received the highest possible evaluations from attendees at 10 different conferences. So welcome, Jim.
Thank you, Jack. Glad to be with you.
You've certainly been in this business for a while and are kind of seen as an expert on things, and not those kind of experts that you go to, that you always see with quick fixes. I think that as of late, you've been trying to kind of redefine what philanthropy is. And so, with your decades of experience, one of the things that I like to ask in Tales from the Trenches was to kind of describe what your best canvas was and why was it the best canvas?
Yeah, and just so we're using the same terminology, Jack, tell me, in your estimation, what canvas means to you.
Yes, right. I forgot about that. That's a Canadian thing. So it's a solicitation. So it's when we go out on an ask. Yes.
Thank you. I thought that was the case, but I wanted to make sure. So I would say, first I would say it was the one that I was best prepared for and one that I felt was most responsive to the donor. And in some cases, the canvas turns out to be much more fruitful than you hoped. You often go in thinking it's a probe, you're probing. And it turns out that, in fact, it opens the door to a canvas. So that's the one I'll describe. Mm-hmm. And it began with inheriting a file that said, do not approach this donor, that her husband had died at the cancer center of the organization that I was representing.
Right.
And then the implication was that she was so upset with the organization that she never wanted to be approached again. Mm-hmm. But I was brand new to the job. And so I thought it important to reach out to her just to say, what can we learn from this experience? And I would say parenthetically, Jack, with the loss of so many donors in Canada, U.S., elsewhere, we really have to be more mindful of why people slip away from us. And even if we can't get them back, we need to try to learn why we lost them.
Right.
So it was in that spirit that I approached her. And what I did was to learn that her experience was much more nuanced than the record suggested. That in fact, her husband had died, but he was very happy with the medical treatment that he received. But what had upset him was the way he was treated when he was first diagnosed and told that he had precious little time to live. And what upset him was he was basically put in an anteroom and left to wait. He's a kind of a stoical Swiss fellow. And so he sat there. No services were offered to him, whether they were religious service or counseling. And then he was brought a sort of dossier and told he needed to visit various offices to process in, as you would say. Mm-hmm. And so he was very upset by what he saw as the inhumane treatment, and he railed about that to his dying day. So once I learned that, I then went to the cancer center director and said, could we improve palliative care, and could we improve the sort of human side of that cancer center, including all the things that this gentleman had described as being so insensitive. And he said, absolutely, we've been deficient. And so he created a concept, obviously in concert with his colleagues, about how to create a more humane way of treating people once they had received bad news, including offering them chapel services, counseling services, whatever was most important to them. So we just had a kind of a draft concept paper, and I went back to her, and I could see that she was apprehensive. She had shared with me why she was disenchanted with the university, and perhaps she thought I was just coming back to solicit a gift, to canvas. But what really I had was a concept, and I said to her, I could see the apprehension on her face, and I said to her, Jeannie, what if I could tell you, name of her husband, that he's finally been heard? And she paused, and there was this very kind of pregnant pause. There was this very deep, soulful look that came across her face. And she said, that phrase so resonated with her. What if he were finally heard? She said, what do you have? And I handed her just a concept paper, not a proposal, about how we had proposed to make that treatment so much more humane, and the way we received patients at those terrible moments so much more humane and caring.
Right. What
if he were finally heard? So she said, what do you have? She took the paper and later, maybe a week later, committed $7.5 million to that concept. So I didn't even know that it was a canvas, but went in to see if we could make that linkage between what she thought was so important to do, what her husband had tried to do but had not succeeded, and then finally listening to him and delivering on that promise. It was just one of those beautiful moments in fundraising and philanthropy where you bridged that gap and you found the solution, and we were able to reawaken that strong philanthropic instinct in her, and ultimately, I think, bring closure to the very issue that had been so tormenting to her and her husband.
Yeah. And, isn't it neat that I've often found that sometimes the best donors are those ones that are, upset or ticked off at the beginning, and then you can kind of convert them over because the pendulum is swinging so much the other way that they actually become advocates for you.
So true. Mm-hmm. We see this over and over again, Jack, and I often say major gifts begin with a complaint. But now we're seeing this on surveys. We'll do surveys of donors, and we strongly recommend those so that we keep in touch and be sensitive to any gaps that may be opening. But we believe in short surveys that can be completed in 15 minutes. So we'll send out something like a 10-question. We'll do this for clients, a 10-question survey. And then we'll say at the end, open-ended question, is there anything else that you would like to share with us that we haven't asked of you? And in so many cases, Jack, we see the donor coming into that, taking another 15 minutes at least, but really laying out their frustrations. And when you follow up on the frustrations, how often we're then seeing very significant gift commitments come back within weeks or months. So very often the donor will tell you exactly the pathway to their greater support if we will but listen, mm-hmm. follow up, and build that bridge. Absolutely true.
Wow. So let's take a second and kind of flip it to what would be the worst canvas you ever were on. Because, we all have dogs that we've been on.
Oh, sure. Sure. Well, there's some I look back on that I wish I hadn't done. I just sort of was too peremptory and putting a number on the table and really not finding that bridge, not finding common cause. But the one that I'll share that I think many people can identify with was when I did canvass a donor who I thought was well prepared, had shown great interest in a particular initiative, had been the prod for moving into that area. This was about sustainability. So he had taken a leadership role. We had listened to him, done as he suggested. His suggestions were good. And so we were now looking to launch this sustainability initiative. I invited him out to lunch, assuming that he would take that leadership role, be the first to make a major gift commitment to it. And so this was in the South in the U.S., and so you go through certain niceties. You don't bring up business till late in the lunch. And you check in with each other. You ask about family. It's just what protocol in that part of the world dictates. Mm-hmm. And so I had abided by all of that and done that genuinely. I liked him very much and did inquire about his business, his family, etc. All those things that would be expected, but came naturally to me as well. And so we got to the end, and I remember he had gotten a refill on his iced tea, and he was trying to get the right balance of lemon and sugar. He was taking a sip and adding a little bit more of each. I could see him working very hard on getting that balance just right. And so I brought up the fact that, he had been instrumental in framing this initiative. I spoke about how important his leadership had been, and then said, for these reasons, we turn to you now for the leadership example and the leadership gift. And I asked him if he would, in that capacity, make the first $1 million commitment to that cause. And just as I'm uttering the words $1 million, he's bringing the iced tea to his lips. And just as he processes what I just said to him, he goes,
Oy.
And he's having trouble containing the iced tea in his mouth. So he kind of chokes it down, and then he starts to giggle a little bit. And then the giggle turns into this sort of uproarious laugh, like he's just been presented with the most ludicrous notion that he could imagine. And it just goes into this kind of full belly laugh. So it seemed in psychic time to me to be, 20 minutes, right? It just seemed to drag on forever and ever. Probably it was no more than 30, 40 seconds. And I was young. I was my first vice presidency, so I was probably in my late 30s. And I was deeply embarrassed, and he just found the idea preposterous. I didn't ask him why. I think I changed the subject.
Right.
I often describe this to people as being like a traffic accident in which time slows down and you can't quite remember how it ended. You just remember it ended poorly.
Right.
And the next thing you can remember is when you got to some other place and were able to recompose yourself. So that's exactly what happened to me. Is I can't remember how I got out of it. I'm assuming I changed the subject. I got out of it and, just was mortified, embarrassed. I mean, blushing for days, like, what did I do? What did I miss? Why did he find it so ludicrous? And when he came to events thereafter, I would go to the opposite side of the room. I maintained this mortification for months and months,
right,
and I just avoided it. And, I thought somehow I had done something embarrassing, therefore I was embarrassing. So I assumed he wanted no further association with me. All these things that get triggered by our own psyche, right? Our own state of mental health. And, so I avoided him. And then maybe, I think it's about 14 months later, I'm in my office. He walks in unannounced, plops down in a chair in front of my desk and says, I think I can do that $1 million.
Oh, wow.
So what happened, Jack, as I gained more experience, was that he was new to philanthropy. He had had a kind of a transformation. He had been in the textile business and then come to realize how damaging to the environment textiles had been and that it was an unsustainable model for textiles itself. And so he became a passionate advocate for sustainability, but new to philanthropy. So when I asked him for $1 million, he had never given more than $50,000 for any cause or purpose. Although he had great capacity, he had never given more than that. So you see what I did, and this is what I share with people, is I jumped him up 20 times. Mm-hmm. You can't do that in fundraising. The best indication of what someone will give in the future is what they will have given in the past. And even though they may be impassioned by what you're proposing or what you've agreed is important, people just don't jump up, as you know, Jack. Right. They step up to greater amounts. So I had tried too great a jump, and it took him 14 months then to get around to saying, I can do that, I should do it, I want to do that, right? So the great lesson was, one, Always look at someone's previous giving, look at their largest gift elsewhere. Don't try to do too much too quickly. 2, if something goes wrong, say, Tim, Ray, where did I go wrong?
Right.
I thought I came prepared. I came respecting of you, of your leadership position. Where did I go wrong? And he would have just said, it's too much.
Right.
I can't imagine doing that. And I would have been able to reframe or maybe rephrase, if not there, then later. But it was just, I went through so much anguish that moment. Days later, even months later, I blocked it out of my mind. I try not to think of it. And the third point is know yourself and know your own comfort with these situations.
Right.
And when something goes wrong, sometimes you'll be far harder on yourself than you should be. You didn't fail. You did your best. I came prepared. I came with a project that I knew he believed in. So that was it, is don't tear yourself up. Say, did I do what I thought was right? Did I do my homework? Did I bring a project that donor cared about? Was I respectful? Did I listen? All those things. If you check those boxes and it doesn't go right, then say to yourself, I did all I can do.
Right. And, it's interesting because you learn something from every donor, right? Whether it's a successful visit or an unsuccessful visit, but you're always kind of in that constant learning. Yes. And you kind of, I guess, hone your craft a bit. Yes. And, that's what the experience gets you, right? Is all the ways to address concerns and to both in your performance and in actually the whole presentation as a whole, right? So
that's it.
It can only get better as time goes on.
And that's the great teacher. Your donors are your great teacher. I think what distinguished my career was I know many people went to conferences and tried to pick up tips from fellow fundraisers, and I found some value in that, but I learned so much more from listening to donors and asking donors for candid feedback.
Right.
And then, that started to evolve my whole philosophy, where I started to see the difference between what donors were telling me versus what many fundraisers were saying at conferences. I thought, oh my goodness, there's a gap here, and we've got to attend to this gap. We're having two parts of the philanthropic equation say very different things.
Right.
And so by listening and then devoting myself to listening, I evolved this philosophy that then distinguished me and allowed me to be a successful fundraiser, because when I got with donors, I was attuned to their sensibilities, not just expectations coming from the organizations I represented.
Right. Well, Jim, this has been absolutely a great chat. Thank you so much for joining. If folks wanted to get hold of you, how would they go about doing that?
You can reach me just at my email, jim@langleyinnovations.com. And I also welcome anybody on LinkedIn. I post regularly, as you know, Jack, and think of myself as a conversation starter. Try to raise interesting questions and make provocative points. So I'd welcome anybody joining that dialogue. Amazing. Those are such great little nuggets that you put. They aren't, these 25-page missives that you have to read. They're easily digestible, and you scratch your head and you're going, they're totally logical. Right. Good. Coming from you, I'm glad to hear that. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Jim. My pleasure, Jack. Thank you so much.
Hi, folks. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button right here.